And welcome into Critical Thinking with your host with the most numbers, me, myself, and I, Andrew Coppins. That's right, after a week of the best of, thanks to guest hosting the Rants of Izzo program right here on Mojo 50 Radio. I am back live and direct, a jam-packed show, not one but two guests for you. So you know the drill. You can find me on the social medias at The Coppins Show. Last name is Coppens, Coppens. Tons and tons to talk about. Amazingly, this show will be impeachment free. I am not going to be talking about the move that the Democrats made. I'm not going to be talking about impeachment at all. We'll save that for another time because we've got some other topics to discuss. And folks, the numbers are in. Fiscal insanity, not so shockingly, rules the roost in Washington, D.C. We've got to say hallelujah because the CTU strike is over here in Chicago. I will be joined by Adam Schuster of Illinois Policy to chat about what is actually in that deal. Is it a good deal for the taxpayer? And so very much more. Deadspin's owners say stick to sports, and the social justice sports warrior throws an absolute fit. We'll talk all about what's going on with Deadspin and the classic case of media overreaction. But first, whether you knew it or not, the last time we were here, we had talked about Tulsi Gabbard, the candidate, what she stood for and what she believed. And it kind of was a light bulb moment for me, if you will. And it's a perfect launching point for a series that we're going to be doing of deep dives into the presidential candidates. And one of the candidates that we've got to take seriously is Pete Buttigieg. And that means I'm going to be joined by my special guest right here, right now, Trent England of the Save Our States Project and the host of the Trent England Show. You can find him on Twitter at Trent England. He's going to be here to discuss Mayor Pete and the movement to abolish the Electoral College. First off, thank you so much, Trent, for joining us here on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me.
And beyond that, for people that might not be familiar with your work, the Save Our States Project, could you talk about what it is and why it's so important within the conservative or libertarian movements?
Yeah, so basically everybody knows that the left doesn't like the Electoral College, but it's not just that AOC is, sending out tweets. There's actually a very sophisticated, well-funded effort from the left to basically hijack the Electoral College system through something called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And they launched their effort back in 2006. It was really came about because of anger over the 2000 election outcome. And we created Save Our States in 2009, so 10 years ago, to push back against this effort to hijack the Electoral College through the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, but also just to make the case for the Electoral College, for the wisdom of the founders and the genius of our Constitution in creating this system of checks and balances in presidential elections.
In checks and balances, I think, I've done my research on this and not just the history, but I think it's important to bring it forward. With that in mind, Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, is one of the major candidates on the Democratic side, and he has recently just, come completely out and said he wants to abolish the Electoral College. Now, if you're on the other side of this, what is the argument, what is the thought process for banning the Electoral College? And what is Mayor Pete's real position here?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things going on. One is just partisan sour grapes. Obviously, the Democrats have lost two elections in recent memory while they got the most popular votes, but they lost the election because they lost the Electoral College. Obviously, it's human nature to look at those rules and say, maybe it's not us, maybe it's the rules. The other thing going on, there are some on the left who really want to nationalize control of elections. They want to put control of elections in the hands of the federal government. They see that as a way to stop states from having voter ID laws and to force states to have universal voter registration, all these agenda items on the left. And there also are some within the Democratic Party, and this is interesting. It's kind of an intra-party fight among the Democrats, in my opinion, where there are urban Democrats who tend to be very liberal, your AOC type Democrats, and there are still a lot of Democrats who are from the rest of the country, not from the big cities.
Mm-hmm.
And the urban Democrats recognize that if they could abolish the Electoral College or nullify it through this NPV compact, they could really tip the scales in favor of the urban Democrats just within the Democratic Party, because big cities would have so much more power. This is why the Democrat governor of Nevada actually vetoed the national popular vote legislation when it came up in his state, because he said, look, I don't want to hand over power of my state to Los Angeles. And I think he also was thinking, I don't want to hand over power over the Nevada Democratic Party to Los Angeles.
And that's a really good point when you're talking about the larger demographics of this country. And one of the points that I've seen made is that if you took just the way that the city of New York voted, the city of Los Angeles voted, and I think it was one other city, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but if you just took the way that those cities voted, there would be no way to outdo that with the rest of the country, because of how big the divide is between how they vote Democrat and Republican, that there's not enough votes the rest of the country wide to make that difference up.
Yeah, people don't realize, California is a big state, but if you take the three largest urban areas in the country, LA, Chicago, and New York, they actually have more people than California in the three biggest cities, the three biggest metro areas, I should say, because those are larger metro areas. But
right.
We have some huge population centers in the United States, and look, they should have more political power because they have more people, but there have to be limits on that. Or else you wind up with a system where everybody else is functionally disenfranchised. And the interesting thing to me is this is exactly what James Madison said at the Constitutional Convention. I mean, there were all kinds of objections to a direct election of the president, but this was the one that really captured James Madison's attention, because he liked the idea of a direct election, of a popular vote. But he said, we can't do it because if we do, we'll hand over control of the executive branch to the biggest cities, the biggest population areas in perpetuity. And he said that's not a recipe for political stability, because it leaves people very disenfranchised if you're not in those biggest cities.
Again, with James Madison's argument there, I think you hit the nail on the head for exactly why federalism works in terms of giving power to, more power, if you will, to the big population centers. That's what the House of Representatives is for, right? You get a proportionality of so you get more power by having more people that would necessarily think like your population center would into Congress. And you can influence legislation. And if we had a real federalist system in America today, instead of what we have, that's what you would see.
Yeah, and that math is reflected in the Electoral College. The framers of the Constitution just took the Connecticut Compromise that formed Congress and used that math to create the Electoral College system. So it's all there. You have representation based on population, but you also have representation based on the identity of states as states and the identity of individual states. And it's worked really well. I mean, we never have any need for federal government control over elections. Presidential appointees are not in charge of presidential elections or re-elections, which I think is sort of an obviously healthy reality in our system. And you also have disputes contained. The fact that we turn our presidential election into separate elections within each state means if something goes wrong, if there's fraud, if there's just poor election administration in one area, it's contained in that state, sort of uses state lines like the watertight compartments on an ocean liner, right? So if you have a problem in one place, it doesn't sink the whole ship. And, this has really saved our bacon. People will think of 2000, but if you go back further to the elections after the Civil War, I mean, this was critical. We would have wound up with another civil war if the election fraud that ran rampant in the late 19th century was not able to be contained in individual states. And I mean, this is just part of the genius of this system, pushing power down into the states, and it actually just works really well over time.
You mean to tell me, somebody who lives in Chicago, that there's election fraud? No way.
I mean, that's and you think about, right, Americans know that we've seen real election fraud in the past.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of concern about it in the present and the future. And one of my concerns about this national popular vote plan is that, even if there wasn't election fraud, the problem is there would be no way to verify that, right? At least now these things are contained within our own states. We have the potential to, through the politics in our own states, try to create better election laws. But I mean, I can't imagine the kind of distrust we would have, and probably litigation and uncertainty, if all of a sudden, instead of Illinois' election being contained within Illinois, and Oklahoma, where I am, our election being contained within Oklahoma, if all of a sudden a stolen vote in Chicago can directly cancel out a legitimate vote in Oklahoma, or vice versa, right? I mean, you're going to have so much more partisan distrust. And, and ultimately the only solution to that, as I said, would be pushing that power up to the federal government. But I think that could be a solution that's worse than the problem.
Absolutely. And earlier you kind of hinted at something that my research has shown me, which is that, right now we've had two elections within, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, within 5 election cycles. We've had two of the last, what is it? 2, 4. Yeah. 2 of the last 5 elections have gone the way of Electoral College over popular vote, and that was 2000 and 2016. But when you look at the totality of American history, it's 5 elections that have ever happened that way. And 2 of them happened to be in the late 1800s. And it was almost in the same kind of a time frame in terms of the amount of elections between the two. So what would you say to people that say, well, we're living through extraordinary times and we've got to change the system? I would argue that that's kind of the point, is that this is the exception to the rule.
Well, that's right. And it's also the Electoral College really doing exactly what it's designed to do in both instances, in the 1876, 1888 elections and in the 2016 elections. I mean, in both cases, what you have is a Democratic Party for very different reasons. A Democratic Party that has become really a regional party. And obviously, in the late 19th century, it was the Deep South. And so they were winning these states in the Deep South with huge margins. 1888, the Democrats won 86% of the vote, or I think 84% of the vote in South Carolina. Right? I mean, huge, overwhelming margins. Some of this was voter fraud. There was a tremendous amount of voter suppression in some of these states. But, they were able to run up the score where they were already popular. And that was a recipe for winning the most popular votes. But you can't win the Electoral College that way. In 1876, 1888, both instances, this is what happened to them. It was exactly what the founders wanted the Electoral College to protect us from, was one region of the country where, you have a party that's so popular they can pump enough votes out of that region that they can win the most popular votes, but that's unhealthy to have a system like that. So we have the Electoral College. And really, the Democrats, once they ran Al Gore in 2000, which was a big shift, right? Bill Clinton had been a much more moderate Democrat. He took a lot of centrist positions, and obviously, electorally, he did very well. With a little boost maybe from third party candidates in both of his elections, but still. He did pretty well. He had a lot of support from Americans in small towns and rural areas. And Al Gore was, much more of, what I would characterize as kind of an elitist candidate of the left. He had a lot of support from big cities. He couldn't even win his home state of Tennessee. He couldn't win Bill Clinton's home state of Arkansas. He lost West Virginia for the first time. The Democrats had lost West Virginia in modern history. And he had a coalition of the big cities. But that's not enough to win under the Electoral College. And Hillary Clinton came back with that same coalition in 2016. I think the Clinton campaign has taken a lot of blame for this, and I think they deserve that. But it's also, a lot of the blame goes to the media, because their friends in the media were telling them, you can't lose this election. And so the Clinton campaign basically sat on their imaginary lead, kind of, ran up the score in places like California, where they were already popular, and forgot about the Electoral College that says, no, you actually get a benefit from reaching out to Americans who aren't like your party's base. And this Trump campaign did just a masterful job in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and they got rewarded for building a better, broader coalition.
Absolutely. And it's kind of funny because leading into the 2016 election, one of the things that I always look at is, let me see the yard signs across the state when I'm traveling. And when I traveled through Wisconsin, it was at least a 4 or 5 to 1 Trump sign to the sign for Hillary Clinton, right? That was a really big indicator for me that she was doing it wrong in that state. And nobody wanted to listen to what was happening on the ground there. And I think ultimately that is what ended up losing her the election. But again, we're speaking with Trent England of the Save Our States Project and the host of the Trent England Show. Just 2 more questions before we let you go here on Critical Thinking. First off, we've talked a little bit about the MPV and kind of the history of it, but going forward, if it were to become something that actually triggers itself, do you see this actually getting past a challenge on the judicial side of things? I have a feeling there's going to be a very quick challenge and a very quick win when you talk about where this stands on the constitutional side of things.
Yeah, so just to fill in listeners, right? This has a trigger. So it's been adopted by 15 states plus the District of Columbia, and those states control 196 electoral votes. But there's this trigger where it only takes effect if it would actually control the outcome of presidential elections, which means it only takes effect if they get states worth 270 electoral votes. So they're close, but they're not there yet. And you can't sue until it actually takes effect because of the rules that limit the power of federal courts. And so certainly if it took effect, Save Our States would be right there in court challenging the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. I am not very optimistic about the chances in court, because this is an idea. This National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an idea so dumb the founders never thought about it. They never considered that a state would surrender its own power and ignore its own people in presidential elections. And because they never considered that, when you just read the text of Article 2, Section 1, where the Electoral College is defined, there's no explicit limitation on a state legislature's power to do this. Now, I think there's a clear implicit, if you understand what the founders were trying to do, it clearly goes against the founders' intent, the original intent.
Right.
But would a judge, would a judge use that to strike it down? I am not optimistic that would happen, because frankly, liberal judges are activist judges, right? They're glad to go out and do what they want. But in this case, they would just sit back and say, no, we think this is fine. And, conservative judges are the ones who take some of these rules limiting their power seriously. They don't like to meddle in election type disputes. And I think a lot of conservative judges would say, look, I don't like it, but I'm not sure it's my job to strike it down. That's why Save Our States works so hard to stop this in the states, in state legislatures. I believe that we have to stop it in the states and prevent them from getting a political victory, which would then force us to kind of put our trust in judges. I think that would be very dangerous.
And The final question I have for you here is, if this MPV goes into effect here, I think this is the one of the bigger tipping points, or could be one of the bigger tipping points in what's become the balkanization of America. You've got these big urban centers that are super liberal. You've got, the rural parts of America that are much more conservative, or lean more libertarian conservative, however you want to define it. That's fine by me. But what I would see is, if this were to happen, is the potential for this to be one of those great tipping points in a potential, whether it's an ideological civil war or an actual armed conflict, God forbid. But I could see this type of a situation where suddenly the people who are in the minority have absolutely no power, and they're just at the whim of whatever these major urban population centers want to do. I could see that being a situation that really boils over in a not so good scenario for the entire country.
Well, and you mentioned that you were in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've seen the debate on the left in the big cities has almost become a debate over whether or not people believe in mathematics, right?
right.
It's whether you have to balance budgets or whether you just don't have to balance budgets at all, right? Whether you can just come up with imaginary sources of revenue on paper and run your city into a sea of red ink. It's kind of like these people have forgotten that they can't print money. Only the federal government gets to do that. And what I worry about is if we get rid of the Electoral College through this NPV compact or in any other way, it would open the door to the Democrats shifting even more toward being focused on the big cities and taking the position that we need to bail these cities out. We've heard some talk about this in the past, but it's politically impossible with the Electoral College. Suddenly, without the Electoral College, it might not only be politically possible, but be politically rewarding for Democrats to campaign on that basis. And if you force the rest of the country to write a blank check to these big cities that have been so irresponsible that they can't even keep people, they can't even get people to use the bathroom in the bathroom, right?
Right.
It's just sort of mind-boggling when you see these stories from Los Angeles and LA and Seattle, where I grew up. I mean, these people are destroying their societies. But no doubt they will turn to the rest of us with their handout. And that's what I really worry about long run with this. I mean, I think you're exactly right. I can't imagine people in Oklahoma going along with a scheme to bail out Chicago because they have, handed over so much power to the unions there. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really playing with fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lord knows, after going through 10 or almost 11-day strike from the Chicago Teachers Union here, and that kids just getting back to school on Friday, it definitely was a scenario that you saw a battle for political power from the unions versus somebody who's actually super progressive in Mayor Lori Lightfoot, putting her foot down and doing what she did to protect the taxpayer, while also having to balance, hey, guess what? We're still going to have to increase your property taxes because we've got a nearly $900 million budget hole of our own to fix. It was an interesting tightrope that she was walking here as she was trying to talk about the budget and also having to deal with the potential for CTU taking even more political power in their own hands, literally under their new contract. But we'll talk with Adam Schuster later about that. As for you, what do you have coming up? How can people find your show, and where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm on social media at Trent England and also at Save Our States. The Save Our States Project, we push a lot of content out, particularly on Facebook, trying to help people get the best arguments for the Electoral College, know what's going on with this dangerous national popular vote compact scheme. And so those are the best places to find me, at Trent England and at Save Our States, or www.saveourstates.com.
Thank you so much for joining us. And on that note, folks, we're going to head to break right here on Mojo 50 Radio. On the flip side, we're going to be talking a ton about sanity. Welcome back into Critical Thinking with your host with the most numbers, Andrew Coppins. That's me, myself, and I. Thank you so much for tuning into Critical Thinking. I hope you enjoyed the brand new logo and all of that stuff. We're going to have a lot of stuff to present to you with that new logo and some things that we want to do on the side to help us really earn some money here on the show. And after all, we are all capitalist here, so hopefully you will support the efforts of this show. Most of that stuff will go back into equipment and better production value and all of the things that you guys would enjoy, whether or not you're listening to the show live via iHeartRadio or via Stitcher or via anything else that you like to do on the podcasting side, or you're watching this show on the Facebook page for Mojo 50 Radio, or more importantly, heading over to the YouTube page where you can check out a ton of content from this show, smaller versions of the show, the full show, whatever you would like to consume, it is there for you to do so. On that note, what are we going to be talking about here in the second half of the show? Well, we're going to ask where fiscal sanity has gone in Washington, D.C. Actually, not so much in Washington, D.C., more like where has fiscal sanity gone for the rest of the country. We'll talk all about that. We're going to be talking about the death of Deadspin and the eulogies that went nuts. I mean, full-on social justice nutso over the death of a sports website, or allegedly a sports website. And then finally, we're going to talk to Adam Schuster of Illinois Policy, who's going to give us the ins and outs, the numbers, the figures, the facts of the CTU strike ending. That's right, Chicago's Teachers Union and the Chicago Public Schools have a contract in hand. Now, yes, as we're talking here on Saturday, we still have an entire vote to go, but it seems like if a tentative deal is struck, that it's likely to pass. I think the teachers want to be in the classroom, and most importantly, they want to get paid. And we'll talk all about that stuff in a little bit. But before we do any of that, I want to go back to the very beginning of this entire diatribe and talk to you about fiscal sanity. We already know that Washington, D.C. is fiscally insane. We've talked about why modern monetary theory is helping both the Republicans and the Democrats just spend like drunken sailors. We've talked all about those types of things. But I had a discussion earlier this week on my private Facebook page, not the public one, but with a brother of mine from my fraternity life. And, you know, he put out this meme about how Donald Trump inherited, was it $590 billion deficit, and now it's 900, almost $1 trillion deficit, right? He's doubled the deficit in his 4 years in office. And his comment was about, well, gee, I wonder, tax cut this and tax cut that. And that irks me more than anything, because when you're talking about the deficit that is being run by the federal government today, it would be one thing if we were taking in less taxes than we were supposed to be taking in. It would be one thing if our tax revenues as a whole were decreasing because of tax cuts. It would be one thing to make that argument, but that is flying in the face of actual facts. So here's the bottom line, okay? Trump is at fault for that deficit. Whether you like Trump or not, you have to be honest. Trump is setting the tone here. The Democrats are at fault. They're the ones who have put together these continuing resolutions and budget deals over the last couple of years, and they've spent like crazy. And Republicans, those who controlled both the House and the Senate for 2 full years, you had an opportunity to rein in the spending. You had the opportunity to do the things that you needed to do in order to make sure that everything was running at a neutral level on the budget, or actually making money and putting money back into all of the debt that we already have as a country. Instead, you spent like drunken sailors, despite the tax cuts and in lieu of the tax cuts and all of the things that were going on. So here are the numbers that you need to know. If anybody wants to make the argument that it's the tax cuts that were the problem or are the problem with our deficits, How does this square with the fact that we have 12% more in corporate tax revenue last year? We also took in 4% increase in overall tax receipts. That's right, 4% across the board. 4% more money was taken in last year, despite the fact that tax cuts have been in place for a couple of years now. How does that square with reality when it comes to all of this? That's what I want to know. How do you square the fact that we've taken in more money in taxes, despite the tax cuts, with ballooning the deficit? It cannot be the case. And here's why. Spending was up 8%. Spending outpaced the increase in overall tax receipts by 100%. There is your problem with the deficit ballooning. You can't take in more money and then spend more than what you're taking in and expect anything but a negative result. Now that is a pox on everybody's house. Let me spell this out as clearly as possible. When you decrease taxes and you get more revenue, that is good news. But when you spend more than the record-setting revenue stream, that's bad news. That means a president who wants to spend more money than ever before. You have a Congress, whether it was Republican or Democrat, that doesn't care about fiscal responsibility. Everybody shares the blame here. And if anybody says that putting the blame on anybody else but Donald Trump is whataboutisms or passing the buck or whatever else, I'm sorry. Everybody shares equally responsibility for the budget. Congress sets the money, sets the budget. Donald Trump signs it or doesn't sign it. That's how our system of government works. The legislature makes the law, the executive branch executes the law, and then the judiciary, the judicial branch, does what? Interprets the law. In terms of budget, the budgets come from Congress. They come from the House of Representatives to the Senate to the president to sign. If Donald Trump really cared about fiscal sanity, he would say no. Do they have the votes to override his veto in the Senate? Probably not. Yet, Donald Trump agrees to all of this insanity. If he were smart, he could pick that fight, or should have picked that fight, with Republican-controlled both the House and the Senate back in 2017 and 2018. He had those opportunities. So, Republicans, shame on you. And Democrats, shame on you. This country needs some fiscal sanity in the worst possible way. That nearly $1 trillion annual deficit number should alarm everybody. Yet nobody in DC cares. Do you wonder why that hashtag Impeach DC movement of mine is gaining steam? All right, let's go ahead and move from that insanity to one of the craziest stories of this week. And the story is Deadspin. Now, if you're not a sports fan, chances are you've never heard of Deadspin. If you're an actual sports fan that cares about X's and O's and numbers and stats and everything else, chances are you've probably never heard of Deadspin. If you're into pop culture and into all of those things, chances are you've heard of Deadspin. Do you see the problem to begin with? Deadspin is supposed to be what? A sports website. It was founded as a sports website, and it has always had a cultural bent to it, but it has never been about anything other than sports for at least its first couple of years. And over the last decade, it has increasingly become anything but sports. It's really sports as a gateway into political beliefs, into really quote unquote talking truth to power, really just social justice activism masquerading as hot sports takes. And so what happened this week? Well, new Deadspin owners have come in, and according to leaked memos, the CEO of this new company, GO Media, came in and said, guess what? You guys are going to stick to sports. We have other websites like Jezebel and you name Gawker and all these other websites. We've got those places to do other commentary. So you guys can commentate on sports when it relates to pop culture and all of those other things when there's an actual sports relevant topic to discuss. The holy hellstorm of editors leaving happened immediately after that. After that, editors left. The people in the Gawker media union decided to walk out in all of those things, and now we've got trouble. That's right, folks. You cannot possibly, as an owner of a media company, say, guess what? I want my media company to look like XYZ, without the editors throwing a massive hissy fit because they're not about to get their way. So, of course, naturally, because Deadspin is politics, Bernie Sanders, who's the union's favorite person, had to chime in with this on Twitter. I stand with the former @Deadspin workers who decided not to bow to the greed of private equity vultures like @Jim Spanfeller. This is the kind of greed that is destroying journalism across the country, and together we are going to take them on. That's interesting. I would love to know how you think you're going to be able to take on the journalistic greed and the capitalistic greed that's happening in journalism when journalism itself is killing itself. Anyway, finally, I want to point this out because of two things. One, this is a perfect example of what happens when social justice activism masquerades as sports commentary. This is what happens when somebody says, I want you to stick to sports, or at least tangentially related to sports topics. Okay? Number two, congratulations to all of you who decided to up and quit. You went with your convictions. That's what you're supposed to do. If you do not agree with the things that your employer is asking you to do, if you do not agree with the direction of the company, you've got two choices. Suck it up and continue to work, or quit. And third, there is a third option for these individuals. Guess what you can do? You can band together, start your own website from scratch. Hell, you can do it for free all over the internet. And when you do that, guess what happens? You get the ability to be an entrepreneur. You can build your own website in the image that you like and in the marketplace. If people like your ideas, like your writing, like your take on sports, and because sports has to be social justice all the time, if that's what they want, they will read it. They will consume it. And guess what? You'll make money. And maybe you'll also gain a perspective on what it is to run a business. Because that's what these people who are hiring you are there to do. Run a business the way that they see fit. If you disagree, you had the choice. And most of you took the choice to walk away. Congratulations on doing so. You did the thing of your convictions. At the same point in time, that does not give you carte blanche to do whatever it is that you want and bitch about quitting your job. Those were the choices you were confronted with. We are all confronted with those choices at our jobs. Maybe we don't agree with the direction the company is going. That then should make you take pause of where you work and maybe try to find a different job. Or quit your job and do something completely different. Start your own business. Start your own opportunities. That's the beauty of capitalism in America, you socialist morons at Deadspin. And joining me right now as we move from the insanity of social justice warriors at Deadspin to the finale of talking about Chicago Teachers Union, it is Adam Schuster. He is one of the directors over at Illinois Policy, illinoispolicy.com, at Adam_Schuster. Thank you so much for joining us. Adam, I think everybody in this city of Chicago is saying, hallelujah, the strike is finally over. But the devil is always in the details. So I wanted to have you on so we can go over some of these details. And over the past month, we've had Miley Smith on, and we've really been chronicling the CTU strike and why it really matters for the rest of the United States. So, first off, your overall thoughts on what took place over the past 2 weeks here with the CTU strike, personally, I'm left wondering, what was the point of this strike when I take a look at some of the things that the Chicago Tribune has put out, and not even the numbers, just the overarching thing. It seems like this was what was on the table from the very get-go.
Yeah, I mean, it was not that far off from the mayor's original offer. I think that, the question of why this strike happened is something that everybody in Chicago was asking themselves, or should have been asking themselves. And I say that because the mayor started out with an incredibly generous contract offer that she only sweetened over time, that would have raised the average teacher's salary from about $79,000 a year up to almost $100,000 a year over just 5 years. And basically left in place very generous healthcare benefits and all other sorts of perks for them. So a lot of people read the situation and thought that this really isn't about the numbers, and it's not really about even the pay, possibly. It might be about just sending a political message to Mayor Lori Lightfoot, sort of like a power jockeying play within Chicago politics, and that's because the CTU supported Mayor Lightfoot's opponent in the election, and Mayor Lightfoot won all 50 wards. She won by a huge electoral victory, and the Chicago Teachers Union might be trying to sort of prove their relevance and kind of throw their weight around a little bit with this new mayor, who is kind of a reform-minded, reformer. I mean, she's someone who wants to challenge the status quo, who's not willing to kind of accept business as usual, and CTU is, one of the kings of the status quo.
Yeah, no doubt that they're the kings and queens of the status quo, if not the king and queen of this new, reformative justice, social justice type activism within the union movement. But when you look at this, okay, so what are the main points of the deal that actually stand out to you technically? And what's the most worrisome? And what would be the best thing that the taxpayers got out of this deal?
Well, I think the most worrisome thing in this deal by far is actually that there's an increase in the sick bank days that teachers are allowed to keep. And it's a little complicated, so I'll break down why that matters real quick. So they're growing the amount of sick days that a teacher can bank from 40 currently up to 244. And the reason that's so important is those sick days can be used to buy pensionable service credit. So in other words, you can buy almost an entire extra year of service credit that can help you retire earlier with a larger pension. So it's a way of sweetening the pension benefits. That's not going to hit taxpayers right now, but Chicago Public Schools already has a credit rating from the major credit rating agencies that's several notches below junk status, and they've got a huge pension debt problem, so they can't really be doing anything to afford to sweeten the pension benefits and grow the liability at this point. I mean, it's frankly what got us into this trouble in the first place, is handing out these kind of sweeteners without really doing the analysis to figure out what the long-term cost is going to be. So that's the worst provision of the contract. I think the best thing that happened is that on some of the most expensive items, Mayor Lightfoot was actually kind of able to hold her ground. She, refused to budge on the raises. She refused to drop it from a 5-year contract to a 3-year contract. And when the strike finally did come to an end, the teachers wanted her to make up all of the instructional days that they had missed. Essentially, they wanted back pay for the time that they had walked out and decided not to strike. And she decided to give them only 5 days of those days back out of the 11 days that they were on strike, which is going to be, a huge cost. We calculated that it'll cost taxpayers about $91 million in pay and benefits just making up those 5 days. But it's certainly, better than what the CTU is demanding. The final contract, according to our calculations, will cost about $113 million. But CTU is demanding a contract of about $400 million in the first year.
Yeah, so when you take a look at it, it seems like the average taxpayer, the average person who pays property taxes, which are paying all of these bills, that person made out better than than would have been expected had the CTU really kind of won this strike, if you will.
Exactly. I think that's a good read on it. Another way of putting it is that the median. So if this contract was fully paid for just with property taxes, there's other revenue sources that they could potentially use. But if it was fully paid for with property taxes, the median Chicago homeowner would pay about $80 in higher property taxes next year than they paid last year. But the demands from the CTU would have raised their bill by $235. So they are going to be paying more. And it's hard to say that this is a win, for taxpayers or a total win, but it might have been the best that we could hope for given a really bad situation.
Okay, so one of the things that we've seen in this discussion, at least from the CTU side, is that, yes, there's going to be close to $100,000 when you get to that fifth year, but it only affects 20 to 30%. But when I look at that, 20 to 30% is exactly the middle of the wage earner, right? So when I take a look at that, I have to wonder, if you're applying this lesson forward to the rest of America, could this be a model for the rest of the teachers' unions to really start demanding these really high level of returns on salary for really what's low level results when you talk about graduation rates and all of those things in between?
Yes, I think that's certainly the big concern. You're right to say that that's the average, right? I mean, they're saying only 20% make exactly that amount, or would see their salary raised from 79 to 100. But when you count not only the raises that are being handed out as part of the contract, the sort of cost of living raises they're part of this, but also the sort of normal step and lane increases. So this is the way that teachers traditionally move up the salary scale, is with more seniority, their pay automatically goes up, and if they get additional education or certifications or things like that, their pay can go up as well. And when you account for those increases, it's really a 24 or more % raise over just 5 years that'll actually be experienced by the individual. So while the average is going to go up by 16% over the next 5 years, an individual person's or an individual teacher's salary will grow far faster than that. And the really absurd thing is that it's far more generous than the people who are funding their benefits. It's something that they could never expect to receive in their own careers for the vast majority. We looked at Chicago workers with bachelor's degrees so that we wanted to compare apples to apples, similar education levels and all that, and we found that 6 in 10 Chicago workers with bachelor's degrees earn less than the median salary of Chicago teachers. And not only that, but the median Chicago teacher has seen their wages increase much more rapidly over the last 10-year period. So if you looked at someone who was a private sector worker who started working in 2009, right after the Great Recession, and it was a private sector, say an engineering technician and a Chicago teacher, they both would have started making about $56,000 a year roughly. Today, the teacher would make $102,000 a year. That would be an 81% increase in their pay when you account for the raises over the last 10 years on top of, these SEP increases that they've been getting.
Right.
And then the engineering technician would have gone from 56 to only 62%. So that's, there's no, that's just assuming that their wages had grown at the median for Chicago, according to census data, or BLS data rather. And so, it's not just that though. I think there is a risk that teachers across the country will see what the Chicago Teachers Union was able to do, which was hold a city hostage and demand additional concessions from a very progressive, Democratic mayor who had won in a landslide election. And I think that if their goal was to send a message about their power, to some extent they did accomplish that.
Yeah, I can see that, but at the same point in time, one of the things that I really thought was good for the taxpayer is that Lightfoot really put her foot down in saying, you are not going to dictate to us any political position going forward. And for what I'm reading, there is no political language in this new agreement. There's no you must take XYZ stance and must advocate for XYZ, whether that's, the elected school board, whether that's affordable housing, whether it's all sorts of stuff. If that could have been codified into contractual language, we as taxpayers and we as citizens here might have been on the hook for something far more dangerous.
That's an excellent point, because really the thing that was most unique about this strike is what you're talking about right there. Is the union started bringing up all these issues that really have nothing to do with the collective bargaining process, that do not belong in a labor contract and traditionally would never be part of the discussion. Things like affordable housing, more progressive taxation and higher progressive revenues, things like, a specific way of doing an elected school board. They wanted the mayor to support, legislation in our state capital that they supported, and she was able to keep all of those things out of the contract. Now, there is one thing that they did get, which is more of a gray area, which is she had originally said she was not going to put in writing any guarantees about hiring additional support staff. She had campaigned that she wanted, to hire additional nurses and counselors and social workers for Chicago schools, and a lot of them do need it. But she had campaigned on doing that, within the budget constraints, within what taxpayers could afford, within what the city of Chicago could afford, given its really precarious financial position. So she did end up giving them something on the staffing levels, guaranteed, hiring and things like that, which, that's not salary and benefits. It's kind of a gray area whether that really should be part of the collective bargaining process. But you're definitely right to say Mayor Lightfoot really did a good job of holding the line, faced with a really impossible situation and a very militant union and a state law that gives her, very few options to end the strike without just kind of rolling over. And I think that's why traditionally that's what's been done in Chicago, is that, the union's demands have been nearly fully met, and Lightfoot did, protect taxpayers better than we've seen in the past.
All right, Adam, why don't you let people know how they can find your work, some of the analysis that you're doing, and where they can find all of that?
Absolutely. So if you go to illinoispolicy.org, you'll see all of our articles about the teacher strike, about the final contract. Actually, the analysis of the final contract should be coming out within the next few days. We finished the scoring on that, but you'll have all the research that we've talked about so far, including comparing the pay and benefits of Chicago teachers to the people who fund them, a description of all the issues that were in the strike. So that you can find that at illinoispolicy.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at Illinois Policy, or my own handle is at Adam_Schuster, SCHUSTER.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And on that note, that ends our show here this week for Critical Thinking. Do not forget, you can follow me on Twitter at The Coppin Show. That's COPPENS. Coming up next, Matthew Holloway and the HollowNet right here on Mojo 50 Radio. Until next week, be smart, be safe, and keep on being the amazing people you are.